Hi, it's John here again, and today's lesson, or whenever day you're watching it, might not be today, probably won't be today, probably won't upload this for another week, but anyway, triads, handy kind of chord formation that you can use in conjunction with your open chords and in conjunction with your bar chords, which hopefully you've already learned through this series. So, and when you're playing left-handed upside down, your triads are basically going to be starting on either the low E string or on the A string. Now when you're playing a triad, that's defined as like a root, third, and fifth, a chord that contains those notes and might have further thirds and fifths compounded on top of those, maybe even some decorative sevenths and ninths and things, but it has to be the root, third, fifth, right, to be a triad. And so when you start them on the low E string, it's kind of what you're doing is you're basing it off of this G, B, D kind of position, right? Root, third, fifth, and then the octave is naturally above that. So if we kind of, like we do with bar chords, just use our index finger as the nut and move that up and down, I find that while this, okay, this is a root, third, fifth octave, if I want to do one up on C, I just move my finger up and I make that same kind of position. So I'll bar it here, but I'll have my pinky be the root, C, my ring finger be the third, E, and then my index finger is going to bar both the fifth and the octave. And in fact, if it's a major chord, you can bar yet another string and have that be a third above your octave. So we have root, third, fifth, octave, and then another third above that octave. And then if it's another major chord in this same key, I can just slide that same position up to where my pinky's on the D, and that's a D chord. D, F sharp, A, D, F sharp, right? So major chords are pretty easy on the E string here when you're playing them as a triad. The only thing is that this top string here may or may not be part of the chord. So if I'm playing a C triad, I can let this E ring because that's part of the C chord. But if I'm playing a D, I may just want to play 5 of the strings instead of all 6, unless I want that in there as a jangly ninth, which I probably won't. I could maybe fret this up here and turn it into a D7 if I want, but major chords follow that pattern. Root, third, and then fifth octave, maybe another third if you want it. Minor chords, very similar, except if we're basing it again off of what would be the chord here, like a G, B flat, D, G, that's great, but I'm not going to play this note up here. You can only do 4-note chords with minor triads unless these upper 2 strings are part of the chord or something jangly that you want to add on. So that's like your minor chord. So to do that somewhere else, let's say we're still playing a G major and I wanted to make an A minor chord, the 2 chord, so there's your root, there's your A, and instead of using your ring finger for a major third, you'll use your middle finger for a minor third. And then the same thing with this, except I'm not going to extend it across. This is only going to be the fifth in the octave. So I have root, third, fifth, octave. And then I can move that up to a B minor chord, the 3 chord in G. Or up to the E chord. And so, and actually on some of these chords, like on the B chord, you can let that B string ring because that's obviously part of the B chord. Usually when I play this A minor triad, I like to let the B ring as a ninth as well. It sounds like a very sad chord. So before we move on to triads beginning on the A chord, I'll give you a little sample of something I used to do. I think I first discovered these triads about 13 years ago, and when I was playing in a band at the time, I used them in all kinds of songs. And so one of those songs at the time I was doing, so that's like going from that E triad to the E minor to D major triads, and then like the chorus would come, it would be. course, I did it with electric guitar with all kinds of cool effects on it, and there was a really awesome bass line that went with it, etc., etc. And doesn't sound very good on this borrowed $100 guitar, but I do what I can. When I recorded the chorus part here, when I was doing that, I doubled it on the recording with root position bar chords. And to have the triads and the bar chords like together in the recording made it sound incredibly thick and chunky, especially when you have various effects on them. So that's one of the cool things about these triads, is that they are, you have all these notes a lot closer together in voicing than you often get with other chord positions. Now, on to triads that are based on the A string. And so while these on the E string are kind of based off of this position, those on the A string, at least major chords, are kind of based off of what I call the C major position, right? Root, third, fifth, octave. Now for major chords, that's pretty easy. Like let's go up to a G major. I'll put my pinky on the G. That's root, third, fifth. But I can't bar it like before because the B string is only a major third away from the G string instead of a fourth like all the other relationships. So I can't just bar it like I was doing on the other one, or else I'll get what is actually a major 7 chord. And so instead what I do is I do root, right? And then third, major third, fifth, and then the octave is actually this finger up here. And you can move that and that's fine if you're just doing major chords. And it's kind of like what it is very similar to is a root position, not root position, but first inversion bar chord. Right? It's just like playing that, but instead of barring it, I only have my index finger on the one note. I can also bar from here across to that string and kind of leave this one muted. And that's kind of like playing that first inversion bar chord, except it has no note there. But that's a good position to know, where it's like a lazy first inversion bar chord. So that's really just like a triad, an octave, and then another third. Or you can just do it without that, and if this high E string is part of the chord or has a nice jangle, you can leave it. In this case, usually I'll just mute that, or I'll just bar that. So yeah, there's your kind of major chord. You might want to use your thumb or bar it to either to dampen the jangliness, or if you want the jangliness in there, like if you want this like this kind of jangly thing on the D major chord, then keep it in there, whatever. Minor chords based on the A string are not so easy. Well, actually they're incredibly easy to play, but you have to do a lot of muting in the process. Like if I start on the E here, there's root, minor third, fifth. And I can just leave these two jangling because they're part of the E minor chord. But F sharp minor, for example, I may not want to have these things, so I would only be playing 3 strings. A minor, I hit some strings that are not part of A minor. So you got to be either careful how you strum, or you got to be okay with the jangliness. Another cool one would be C sharp minor. You got C sharp, there's root, minor third, fifth, and then the B is actually the 7th of the chord. So there's a way to play a triad as a 7, a minor 7 chord, which is nice in the context of something in the key of A. And these are triads I'm playing, right? There's your D. And then an E. And some of these things, like depending on what key you're playing in, like if I'm playing an E, I can play a triad and let this E ring. It's getting out of tune, but then the 2 chord kind Kind of sounds nice with that jangliness, that F sharp minor with a suspension there. And then you... So depending on what key you're playing in, those minor triads may or may not sound good. I would recommend not using them unless you're really confident in how it's going to sound. But again, just play around with it, see what sounds good. Like everything with this style of playing, there are no rules, there's no right or wrong way to do it. If you like the way that this F sharp minor triad sounds with the B and the E jangling, it's got, you know, some suspensions and what has it got, a seventh also. So use it if it sounds good. So based on this A string, we've got, you know, our major chord positions, right? Root, third, fifth, octave. We've got minor chord positions, root, third, fifth, and then these two may or may not be useful to you. If they're not useful, you might want to use this free finger to mute. You don't have to, but it's a suggestion. So that was kind of based on something, again, like 13 years ago when I first discovered these positions. I was writing all kinds of songs around them, so I had this kind of G chord. And then on this string, instead of doing root, third, fifth, instead of barring it as an octave, I did root, third, fifth, and then I used my middle finger to make it ninth. And then I let these jangle. And I was using these ninth chords. So again, you can see how I'm using those triads for chord melody. And so there I'm combining using these triad plus ninths with some bar chords. There's a second inversion and there's a root position. So that's E minor and B minor, whatever. It's the moral of that story is that these triads, you know, you don't have to use them just in conjunction with other triads. You can use them along with other bar chords. You can use them with all these jangly chords. You can use them with open position chords down here. It's just another tool to have in your toolbox. So triads, again, based on the low E string, it's kind of root, major third, and then you bar for fifth, octave, extra third. If it's minor, then you just do four strings, root, third, fifth, octave, and these other two, you may want them, you may not. Again, you can try to mute there if you don't want them. If it's on the A string, it's going to be root, third, fifth, octave. And if it's minor, root, minor, third, fifth. And then these may or may not be something that you want. And you can move these up and down the neck. The position for the triad themselves stays the same. It's just whether or not you want these ones jangling or how many strings you're playing with this hand. So triads can be incredibly useful. Just kind of depends on what you want to use them with, how they sound along with jangly strings, how they sound along with open chords or barred chords. And then I kind of gave you a little cheat there for like this lazy version of the first inversion bar chord. Instead of playing this bottom string where you got to kind of really make sure you fret that tightly, you can just do root, third, and then only bar three strings with this, fifth, octave, third. Anyway, I think I've rambled on long enough. So those are triads for left-handed upside down guitar. I hope that you find them useful.